Okay. And we're recording. Great, we are recording. Good. And one of the interesting things about this data, and you'll find this in this work, when you work with this information, is you go down, when you go through it, why is it doing that? Go back. And when you do this, one of the things that you'll see is you look at this data, and one of the things you'll see is that the see this statistical discrepancy? When one of the things when you put in and you calculate everything, you'll find out the numbers don't add up. And this happens a lot. This happens a lot in this work, because what they're doing is this is not perfect. The real world data, in the real world, there's a lot of problems. There's inconsistencies, especially for a country like this. So if you're going to study, for example, if you're going to study a country like this, you have to watch out for things like this. So like when you added up the numbers and you looked at what that's doing. Why isn't that? Oh. Okay. When you look at this, when you get when you go to 1.3 here, and the net this is the balance of payment. See this net lending, net borrowing of the nation. I'd like to blow it up. It's just zoom in. Okay. Because this is quite important. This is your balance of payments. So if you took that, you would realize, you would see that the number you got from just taking the number, it doesn't add up. So and it's usually they'll tell you that there's a discrepancy. Sometimes you don't have that. Okay. Sometimes you don't have. You have to be careful when using this data. So my lesson here is first is use Excel. I want you to get in the habit of using Excel. Use Excel, and you can just copy and paste it. You can always just make a table in Excel. You can just copy it and paste it right into your and then it makes a nice looking graph. But it's a great way to check your work. So you can get into that habit of checking your work, and you'll learn things. You'll start seeing, well, are there problems? Are there problems in the data? And I really also want to encourage you that in your research, at least use this to some degree. Use this information as a base. Use this national accounts data as a base for your, if you're going to look at a country, at least initially, to find out the basic information about the economy, use this as your source. I think it would be very, very useful. A very good. It's a wonderful tool. I think it's a great way to. It's a very good way to get started with your work. Let me go to. And also, I want to talk about you're working on your midterm. What I'm doing. There's a couple of things, and there's a couple of things that I want to that I want to accomplish. And you're in the middle of it, so don't, you know, and this isn't really a test as much as I just want you to think out, you know, what you're doing. Basically, there's a couple of things. One, I want you to see the connections, that the world is connected, and I want you to see how the world is connected. How the world's connected, where do people live, where they live.
What does mean, where do people live? Where
Well, for example, China. Why do so many people live in China? They live in China. Why do so many people live in East China? Eastern China has the biggest concentration of human population on the planet. Why do they have that? They have that because of arable land. They have a lot. It's a fantastic climate. They have the soil. They have the climate. They can support 1 billion people in Eastern China. Eastern China supports a billion population. It's an incredible population that is supported in that country, and it's because of that. So, and some countries have it, and some countries don't. So if they don't have it, if they don't have, for example, Japan doesn't have enough arable land. It simply doesn't have enough land. It would be very difficult for Japan to feed all of its people. And in fact, if you're familiar with the figures, it's only about 40% of calories in this country is produced within the country. 60% has to be imported. Britain is the same way. Britain, very similar, about similar percentage, and it's because the density is so high. There's so little land that it doesn't have the arable land. So those are the things that then you're looking at the natural resources. What are the natural resources that a country has? What minerals does it have? And then that tells you what can they make? What kind of products do they manufacture? Products that they manufacture. What do they manufacture? What do they make? What don't they have? What do they need to trade? What do they need to trade? What products do they need to trade? And then when they start trading, then what is the balance of what is the balance of payments? What is the net and the most important component of net exports? And what do net exports tell us? Savings minus investment. And what happens when you have a shortage of savings? Then that's less than zero. Then the country has to import capital. And if it's positive, then they export. Then they're a net exporter of capital, and then that generates capital flows. So then you have capital flows for savings or investment. Okay, so that creates capital flows, and then you have currency. You need currency, but you need currency exchange rate. Then you have to figure out how do you value the currency? How is that determined? And that's some of the stuff that we're happening now. So then then you have foreign direct investment. So you have foreign direct investment, currency exchange. And it all works back. It's all connected. That's what I want you to understand, is how it's all connected. So that whatever the work that you do, whatever project you do, whatever research you do, keep that in mind. That's kind of your basis, is that the world is connected. And this is how it's connected. So that's the point I'm trying to make to you here, is for you to understand how the world is connected. And these also have political implications as well, of course. You know, these have political implications. And one of the points that I'm going to make with that here is your net foreign direct investment And I think this is something that people should understand quite well in this country. But you want to, this tells you the net foreign direct investment. If it's red, that probably means that there's capital flowing in, inflow of capital. You see, with Africa, there's not much. In a lot of these countries, it's just not attractive places to invest. They have a lot of problems. Let me just make sure that this is, I know there's going to be a disaster here. Okay. They have a lot of, there's a lot of political problems, a country like that. Some of these are wealthy, relatively wealthy countries, so they export capital, and the same here. But there's not a lot. There's not a lot of, the per capita net flow is not very high. And these are relatively poor economies. So what that tells you, it's just not, this part of the world is just still not highly integrated into the world economy yet. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. You're seeing China, the impact that China is having, particularly in Eastern Africa. There's that is a net outflow. But these are wealthy countries. These are wealthy countries. Ireland, we've said it's because it's. I've talked about this last week. It's because it's a tax haven. So that's a tax haven. There's a tax haven. So some of these are tax haven, and you see that difference. There's some net inflow. There's some net inflow into. These are developing economies. Those are developing economies. The U.S. A lot of outflow. Less in these countries. That's again there. It's not so much, and it's fairly light. It's fairly light for there in South America. The net outflow, big net outflow in Japan. You see how that stands up. And this, one of the things you'll see is in not always, but in general, you see the wealthy countries tend to be darker red. They tend to be darker red. And this is all about power as well. You know, a lot of times economists talk about, we think about foreign direct investment as being having nothing to do with politics or power. It has a lot to do with it. People are taking their money, when people invest their money someplace else, they want control. It's about control. You see an opportunity, you invest, but you also want control. You want control because you're investing your money, you want to make sure you get your money back. And so people want to have control. Japan has always been concerned about losing control. And one of the things, certainly early 20th century, Japan looked at Europe and saw how Europe was colonizing Africa, Asia, other parts of the world, and they saw the way that the West was doing that, gaining control and power over these countries. And so Japan wanted to make sure that it stayed independent. Many of the countries in Asia lost their independence. So this is an important consideration. So that's something that is on the mind of people. Is also control. So that is a consideration. You do want to keep that. That's Qatar. That's Qatar. That's in the news as we've talked about. They've spent a lot of money in other places. So that means they've bought friends. So with a little country like that, it only has a few 100,000 people, but they spent a lot of money and they bought a lot of friends. And the same with they're making sure that they're putting a lot of foreign direct investment in other countries. Singapore is the same way. Singapore has gone around and they've bought friends too. It's about buying. When you're a little country like this, you want to buy friends. It's nice to have, and as they've said, and I've seen interviews, we have friends. They're saying we have friends, and this is how they bought it. They bought their friends. This is the percentage of foreign direct investment. As I say, this is not a positive for a country like that. That's not really a positive. But this is a percentage of GDP. You do see this is an influx of capital, a fair amount of capital that's coming into these countries. It is important for development. So a lesser developed country does need that. So I want you to consider both as economic development and also political, the political implications of that. So keep both of those things in mind when you look at these tables. Again, outflow. These are powerful countries. This of course, again, tax havens there. This part of Eastern Europe developing. United States, same thing. Again, the powerful countries. You'll notice the powerful countries tend to be red, except for when you look at something like Africa. You saw in Asia, Japan was the only dark red on that. That's Papua New Guinea. It's not a powerful country. South America. Chile is just it's such a rich country, attractive country to invest in, politically stable. They're happy to get the money here. This is more due. It's just a lot of political problems. That's Venezuela. If you're following that, again, Japan, the darkest red. Some of these other countries, it's actually, this is just because of political instability. Pakistan, Afghanistan, it's not attractive places to invest. So there's different stories. So when you look at these maps, you have to keep that in mind. But that's Korea, South Korea, of course, North Korea. That's Mongolia, of course, getting a lot of investment from China. Nobody wants to invest in Iran. It's because of controls, of sanctions. That's civil war there. That's Yemen. So there's a civil war there. Greece is not a particularly exciting place to. Greece is the kind of place that in the West that if you want to lose your money, that might be a good place to lose it. It's not an easy place to do business. Now what I want to do is I've talked about the foreign exchange, and I want to go over, because we talked about the floating regime, floating exchange, and fixed exchange rates, and they do have very important implications. I've talked about that most of the world, most of the developed world, is on some type of floating exchange rate, and we've had that regime, the floating exchange rate regime, since 1971. And one of the things that one of the connections that I want to make in terms of that is that the financial crises, that floating exchange rates and financial crises is back and forth. We're having financial crises because of floating exchange. A lot of benefits, but we're getting a lot of problems. Now, bankers, investment bankers, love floating exchange rates. There's all money moves in and out. Hot money jumps in, hot money jumps out. There's money to be made by all kinds of games and ways to play. Floating exchange rates are fun for investment bankers. They love floating exchange rates because when you have floating exchange rates, really smart people can take advantage of them. Really smart people that understand math and understand understand the game can take advantage of that. So that's that. But there's also benefits. There's been benefits to the world, but there's also problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and see where in the world do we have the floating exchange rates and fixed exchange rates. And the exchange rates, and that's an anchor. You're usually fixed to the US dollar. Usually, most of the time. Sometimes where there's a euro anchor, and we'll see where and how and why. So that's a euro anchor is where it's anchored to the euro, or a dollar anchor. It's anchored to the dollar. Composite anchor is where the currency is anchored to more than one free floating or floating currency. So that's like a basket, what's called a basket of currencies. That's a composite anchor. Now there's two types of floating regimes. There's free float. Free float is just largely determined by the market, and intervention by financial authorities is infrequent. And there's a definition: no more than 3 times in 6 months, and over a period no longer than 3 days. That's where the market basically determines the exchange rate. We'll see that most of the industrial countries, including Japan, do that. Now, it doesn't mean if you have followed currency exchange changes, it doesn't mean that, for example, this country doesn't just sit down and watch the currency go up and down crazy. Sometimes there is intervention, but it's infrequent. A floating regime is where it's market determined, but and policies do not target a specific level, but there could be a little bit more intervention. In other words, that even in a floating exchange rate, there's central banks can intervene. So you will see the Bank of Japan from time to time, if they think that things are getting too much one way or the other, there may be intervention. So we'll look at each of the world economies in that, and we're starting with Africa, and you'll see this is the euro anchor. All of this, and what's interesting here, most of these countries were part of French West Africa. These were French colonies. And so after, and in fact, France still has they're still really colonies in many ways. There are colonies. If you look, I had a student last year that did Senegal there. And France still has plays an important role in many of these countries. Militarily, they've intervened, like in Mali. They have soldiers in Mali. There's rebels that are fighting there. The French are involved there. There's they do a lot of trade, a lot of investment. There's a lot of French investment in that part of Africa. So these countries were fixed, or they were fixed to the French franc. And then when the franc became the euro, then these countries became anchored to the euro. Now the problem with that, there's a problem with that. Problem for countries like this. These are resource-based economies. These economies are resource-based. Their currency is based on the euro, European. The most important factor for the euro now is the German economy. The German economy is one of the most powerful. It's one of the most powerful manufacturing countries in the world. So what you have is a situation where the German, and to a lesser extent the French economies, but more the German economy, and high value manufactured goods. These currencies are anchored to that. It's not very attractive because what it does is it means that that their terms of trade, their commodities cannot be valued. The currencies cannot adjust to reflect the fact that they're resource based. So it's actually not to their advantage. It's to the disadvantage of all of those of all of those countries. So it's to a degree, it's kept these countries as part, almost still like colonies of France. France, oh no, we don't have anything to do, but they really have a lot to do. They have a lot of political control and economic control, and so it's kind of, to a degree, it's the way they, to some degree, have maintained a control over their colonies, even though they're independent. And that's is an important thing to keep in mind. These are U.S. dollar anchors. Those are anchored to the U.S. dollar. In some cases, like Angola, that's because of oil. Many countries, and we'll see with the Middle East here, they're anchored to oil for that reason. Because if your main product is oil, or a significant export is oil, oil trades in dollars, so that's what your price. That's it. So your export is priced in dollars anyway. So that makes sense to anchor your currency to the dollar. So that's the case in Angola. In the case of Zimbabwe, it's just because the economy is basically collapsed, and the Zimbabwean, I think there's still a Zimbabwean currency, but there's so many zeros, and they keep on shortening the zeros, and then they get bigger. You basically need a whole barrel, a whole suitcases of money just to buy simple goods. So people have to use, when your currency basically is collapsed in value, then another currency comes in. And so that's just an effective dollar currency. These are floating exchange rates here. Many of these are countries that China's made a lot of investment in. So that's kind of interesting that China's made a lot of investment in. Here's Ghana, which is a fairly prosperous country in West Africa that was also an English colony. It was an English colony. So this is a little bit different. It was an English colony. Many of these others were French, but that was an English colony. So was Nigeria. Nigeria is an English-speaking, as is Ghana. And many of these other countries are French, or at least the European language that's spoken is French in many of these countries. Let's see. I think that's about the interesting things to say about that. Liberia was actually set up as former American slaves went back to Africa and established this colony in the mid 19th century. So the people who run this country are descendants of American slaves who went back to Africa, and then so there's a traditional connection to the United States with Liberia, and we can see. Now I've set up these maps so you can see if there's any relationship between the currency exchange, and if the one that you can see, if you look, there's a bit. You see that with the Eurozone, I think this suggests to some degree the negative impact of being in the Eurozone and tied to the euro. Nigeria is a little bit lighter, but you can see it's an other managed currency. So these are oil producers, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. So you can see in some cases where they're a little bit lighter here, the darker ones in here tend to be. You can get that sense that there's a negative impact, but you do see that also here, and these are free floating exchange rate there. But and again, you see here, again these are dollar. This is tied to the oil, and this has a lot of oil, so that country is a little bit higher income. That's Angola. These are poorer countries. They're tied to the dollar, and they're darker red. So it's probably not a positive. Europe, of course, that's the euro. That's the Eurozone, the free float euro. All of these countries. Then you have these free float countries: Poland, Sweden, Norway, and the UK have their own currency. You'll see Finland, Estonia, and Latvia are part of the euro. The interesting thing here, these are both basically the same ethnic group, Estonia and Finland. And then you'll see the euro. This is that's the euro. The Greece, Cyprus, there. Then the floating rates. These Eastern European countries and Turkey. Russia has its own managed rate. And you'll see there's the euro, the eurozone. This really doesn't have much to do. In this case, you don't really see much of an impact of. It's just that these are wealthy countries that happen to have their own the euro and floating currencies. So that's part of the world economy. One of the things you'll see that for the economies that create the currencies are the ones that also have are the wealthiest and the most powerful. So you'll see when you control your currency, that's power. People follow you. They're following. That's part of the floating. So you've got these countries. They're establishing the base. These are countries that are floating. They're floating exchange rates. They're lower income. It's a good question as to whether that's really a positive for them, as these Eastern European countries, whether that's really a positive impact for them. That's Belarus. I have no idea. I've never been able to figure out why Belarus is anchored to the dollar. No idea. Maybe it's because they sell wheat. I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense as to why. You may look here. See, that's Azerbaijan. That has a lot of oil. So that makes sense. That's Armenia. Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia has less oil. Of course, there's Iraq, but we'll get to that in the Middle East. Of course, here, floating exchange rate regimes, the U.S. dollar, the world's major currency, as we pointed out before, but also the Mexican currency. These are U.S. dollar anchor. All of these, except for Costa Rica, the Central American countries. Venezuela is an oil-rich country, so that has a lot of oil. Some of these other countries are just there's a lot of trade, mostly in people. That is, they're leaving their countries and going to the United States, Canada to some degree, but millions of people from this part of the world have migrated north to the United States. Again, probably for many of these countries, that's probably not a positive, that they're fixed, they're anchored to the dollar. It's basically, to some degree, it makes you a colony. You're for those countries. Now, a country like Venezuela, again, when you're selling oil, that's different, because then that makes sense. It makes perfect sense that since the world trades in oil, that your currency is connected to that. Makes perfect sense because that's your export. That's how your currency is valued. And we can see that all is well below average. It's fixed to the dollar. Fixed to the dollar. That's one of the poorest countries in the world. Haiti, right there. All these countries that are fixed to the dollar. The only difference is Panama. Panama is basically is another tax haven. And as you may know, there was the scandal, tax haven, a lot of dirty money, all kinds of funny stuff that goes on in Panama. I met somebody a few months ago who was running a gambling operation in American. He said he lived in Panama. He was involved as a broker for high stakes betting, for high stakes bettors. So he's located in Panama. There's a lot of funny stuff that goes on, that's going on there. Australia's floating exchange rate. These are wealthy countries. You know, it's a wealthy country. It's a floating rate. These are but there's some management. Australia is more powerful than New Zealand, so they're more confident about their economy. And you can see that. South America is interesting. Free float. It's an interesting country. It's Chile. To see it's just different from all the other South American countries. U.S. dollar anchor. It's just a country that's a mess financially, badly managed economy. These are floating exchange rates. Brazil, of course, the most important. It floats, but they manage it. And then to compare, you'll see that these are. It's a mix. It's a mixed picture. In South America, it's not a clear. It's not a clear picture compared to other parts of the world. Asia. We've talked about China a little. China is basically, it's kind of fixed to the dollar. It's anchored to the dollar. China's been talking about making its currency more floating, and it's one of those situations where part of the problem is when you're the kind of government like China is. It's a very managed. It's a repressive country. It's a very powerful central government that exerts a lot of control in many ways, and part of that is they anchor to the dollar, but it's partly in order to control capital flows, to control the flow of capital. Now, and if you know, as you know, Chinese people tend to be very rebellious. They're very rebellious and independent. So the interesting thing about China is that you have tremendous control and a lot of so you have a fairly independent people, but at the same time a very powerful central government. Where Japan is. So one of the interesting things about that is I always tell people, I say China's really not a communist country. China's not. It's never been a communist country, really. I mean, it has a communist government, but it's not a communist country. Japan is more of a communist country than in the sense of socially. People, but it's also a free economy, so it's an interesting, it's really it's an opposite situation where you have a free economy, yet a lot of control, where here, there's a lot of, it's not a free economy and country, and yet a very independent, minded population. I guess I should go. Of course, this part of the world, it's Vietnam, which was closely tied to the United States. Thailand is interesting because it just has all that tourism, so it's that floating exchange rate keeps it is attractive for that reason. In India is more of a floating exchange rate. That's interesting. Again, many of these countries, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. Let's see, that's Kyrgyzstan. That's Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They have a fair amount of oil. Many of these countries, so that's part of that explains that. And the point here is that the world, the currency regimes it's very complicated, but remember that in many countries it's either you have the major countries that are free float, the yen, the euro and the dollar, the three major world economies. Then you have anchors, mostly to the dollar. West Africa, you got to the euro. None to the yen. The yen, that's interesting. It's never. You would think that given the importance of Japan in Asia, that some other country would anchor their currency to the yen rather than the dollar, especially since there's so much investment in trade between Japan and the other countries, these other Asian countries. But I suspect the reason is historical, that countries just won't make themselves a part of a Japanese, to link their currencies to Japan. It's probably a leftover from World War II and that era. It may not make sense, but there's a lot of things in the world that doesn't. With the interesting things here is you can see countries like these countries that are tied. These are a bit lagging, but these floating also are not doing particularly well. I guess in the end, the important thing here is that, again, the most powerful economy is the one that's free floating. Again, it just tells you the biggest economies, the most powerful economies are the ones that have control over their currency, and have powerful currencies. It's, so that's where you get that economics and power, economics and politics, and political and economic power. It's all kind of linked. And you see that's the only country that really has a pure floating exchange rate. As I mentioned about the Middle East, dominated by dollar anchor, and the reason is very simple. These are all, most of these countries are major exporters of oil. As we said, it makes perfect sense, absolutely perfect sense. The exception, Israel is Turkey's an exception, a moderately powerful country. Israel, moderately, certainly a powerful economy for the size of the country. But most of them, not Egypt is different. Egypt does not have oil or natural gas, so that's a difference. But many of these other countries, and Jordan actually has a free trade agreement with the United States, and that might be part of the. They actually have a free trade agreement. Lebanon has traditionally been a center of finance in the Middle East, even though now much of that is done. Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, they've kind of overtaken that. That might explain why Lebanon has a U.S. dollar anchor. In the end, it's a complicated picture. But I think the most important thing I want you to think about is powerful economies, powerful currencies, other countries that follow, that there's some hierarchy. There's some hierarchy that's part of the hierarchy of the world, of the global economy. And you can see, of course, here, the connection. Iraq is just a poor country because it's a mess. It's just been a mess. Syria, the same thing. Of course, that's a composite anchor. I don't think it plays any role, important role in that. Now I'm going to talk about net migration, because one of the things is that countries trade we trade in goods. One of the things we haven't talked about, it's easy to move goods. So we've talked about different resources, where people live, the land, their resources, the products they manufacture, that creates the trade, that creates the net export, savings, investment, that creates capital flows. And we've talked about how the connection that countries that do invest, that there is also a power relationship. Well, people also move, and we haven't talked about that, but people also move. They migrate, and so what happens is you've got flows. You've got people that are leaving. The dark red are people leaving. Of course, that's Libya. Libya is in the middle of a civil war, terrible civil war. This is for the 2008-2012 period. That's the civil war had started by then. If anything, it's probably redder. It's more red. Basically, anybody who can get into a boat is doing so and trying to float to Europe. Many, of course, don't make it. If you followed any of that, many people drown. I mean, it's thousands of people a week. Thousands. I think it's like 10,000 a week that are basically getting on boats, and they're trying to get to primarily to Italy, because Italy is the closest. There's a little island, Lampedusa, there. It's right there. There's Malta there, but that's an Italian island, right? Very, very close to the Tunisian coast. It's an Italian island. One imagines if the Italians gave it to the Tunisians, that would stop the flow of migration. But lots of immigrants. There's Syria. Lots of people leaving Syria. There's that's Zimbabwe. It's not a particularly attractive country. Eritrea. It's one of the most repressive regimes. Very, very repressive regime. They fought a 30-year civil war with Ethiopia to break away. And then once they broke away, they established a very repressive government rule over their people. Rather curious. In fact, in many places where you find Ethiopian restaurants, they're actually Eritrea. They're people from Eritrea. I know certainly in New York, for example, most of the people where it says it's an Ethiopian restaurant are actually run by Eritreans, which I suppose means that probably ethnically they're fairly similar. Mali is having a lot of problems. That's not a particularly stable country. South Africa, on the other hand, is a reasonably. These are reasonably prosperous countries. They're fairly attractive. There, it's going to be workers, guest workers. They're going to go in the oil industry. Gabon, again, not many people, and a good economy. So that's going to attract some migration. That has been the in-migration. That probably has changed. That's South Sudan. I don't think that would be. That was those are people that migrated at the end of the Civil War. But basically, it's been the Civil War with Sudan. Once they've gotten their independence, they've basically been in civil war with each other most of the time. So this is probably red now. People are now fleeing, and I think that's the same situation here. That's the Central African Republic. And so I wanted to show, this was net migration, the 2000, this is earlier migration. I just wanted to show you some of the trends. Of course, Somalia, it's interesting because Somalia, it's red, but not so much. This was a tremendous exodus of population earlier in the previous decade. Much of the population was leaving. Civil war. This was a country that was suffering from a terrible civil war. Many people went to Europe. Many Somalians went to Europe. Some to countries like Canada. Zimbabwe, of course, through a lot of problems in this period. That's migration to South Africa. So South Africa was getting the flow. So some of this you can see the flows of population. A flow to South Africa, a flow for the oil industry. Ghana, attractive country because of a stable government. So that's a stable government. That's Liberia, and that is Sierra Leone. You've had some civil wars, people going back in that era. Some of this is just here in North Africa, it's migration to Europe. Some of this is actually because Chad is there's in-migration. It's one of the least attractive countries in the world, so it's not because people are going there for any opportunity. But there's a region called Darfur, D-A-R-F-U-R, Darfur, where which is black. It's different from the Arab. Much of north of Sudan, this area is Arab, and there's been kind of a civil war there. People are fleeing from this miserable country to this miserable country. So it's some of this is that's why you get this type of thing. These are countries like Senegal. It's a fairly stable country. But it's a very, how do I say, these entrepreneurial people, they go to other countries and they just sell, many of the Africans that sell things in Europe are like Senegalese. They're very good traders. They just have a natural culture of trading. And this is going back earlier. Again, you had this was during the Civil War. This would have been because of war. These flows. This was let's see. Well, that's Rwanda. That would have been going back to. That was the terrible crisis that happened in that decade. That day. So you had this was just because of people were fleeing fleeing civil war here. There's just a lot of this was a very unstable period on that part of Africa. Again, that's the Civil War. These were people returning from. This would have been conflict related. A lot of you'll see. There's been a lot of conflict in Africa over that period. Europe is an attractive place. Europe is a very attractive place for migrants. Norway's taken a lot of. This is Syria. A lot of this blue, or to some degree, a fair bit of this blue are Syrians. You've had, I think, 4 million Syrians who've been about a third of the population, as was forced out of their homes and have left. So you're seeing them go to the surrounding countries. So that's this flow. That's this flow. One of the message here is a lot of the flow in people, as opposed to goods, is some of it's opportunity. My country, for example, it was largely populated by people that have immigrated from all over the world that went there seeking opportunity, and this is where you have countries that are attractive places for people to go. They tend to migrate towards those places. Norway, as I said, has taken a lot of immigrants from Syria, from the Middle East, particularly Syria. Same thing with Sweden. That's this dark blue. I think a lesser degree, but some also in Finland. So some of that. This is out migration. When they joined, this is Latvia, Lithuania, out migration. They joined the EU. Then these people headed right there. Big outflow population from both, especially Lithuania. Bit of a brain drain. That are basically leaving their country. Some of that eventually, the thing about this kind of migration from a country like this that otherwise is fairly prosperous, in many cases the people migrate and then invest back in their country, of the country that either they're from or their ancestors are from. That's a pattern that you see, is you see the human migration and then later there's an economic investment that's back in the country. That happened certainly in Italy, for example, which had a lot of immigration in the United States 100 years ago. My one side of my family came from Italy, so they went to Italy. Many of the people that went to Italy, either they or their children then invested back in Italy and had a big impact. I think to Japan that had some degree. The migration out of Japan in the 1920s to the United States, that there was some investment as a result of back in Japan. Some, but not, it wasn't a major role. Turkey, that's Syria, refugees. We'll see Lebanon later, that's refugees. Swiss is probably refugees. But some of this people, and just people migrating, some of it's migration from Africa to these countries. Some of it is migration from southern Italy to Germany. Germany is a popular destination for people from southern, like a lot of Italians are moving up to Germany, especially from southern Italy. Of course, that's the UK, very popular destination. We had Brexit, the Brexit vote. People are reacting to that, and you wonder what's going on here in Ireland. Why is Ireland so dark red? Financial crisis. This was 2008, 2012 financial crisis. Ireland was hit very hard. I had a student in my class last year. They did their study on Ireland. They studied the foreign direct investment flows in Ireland from the financial crisis. It was a very interesting work that student did. A nice piece of work. Now, one of the things I'll hear talk about the students from last year. I had 22 students in a year ago. So I had 22 students, and many of a number of them did quite a. So there was a lot of work. So don't worry. There's only 4 of you. So I'm certainly not expecting all these different things. But one student did that. A lot about migration as a result of the crisis. It was absolute disaster. There was financial. The financial crisis was a disaster for Ireland. It was absolutely a disaster. It was also a disaster for Spain, a disaster for Greece. These are out migration as a result. Some of the other is just these are poorer countries. It's Romania. People leaving as it joined the EU. Romania, Bulgaria joined the EU. Opportunity to migrate. That was a not attractive country to be in economically, and then they were part of the EU, so it became they could free flow of people. People started leaving. Same thing that happened here in Latvia and Lithuania, lesser extent, Estonia, attracted to Europe as after those countries joined the EU. This was an earlier, going back another 5 years. What I'm doing is taking 5-year periods and then going back so you can see the kind of flow of people over time. It's one of the things that we're, and let me explain why I'm doing this. Because when you have uneven income, those areas with higher income become they're magnets. They're magnets for people. And here you have in Europe, you have most of these are single currency. Most of these countries are part of the European Union. Many of these countries are members of the EU. Bulgaria, Romania, Austria. These are all EU members. So the less attractive countries, people are migrating to the more attractive places. You had in Europe, this was Ireland, this is the boom. This was the boom before the financial crisis. These were the countries that were booming. Spain was booming. It was artificial. It was a real estate boom. People were flooding to get to Spain. Then as soon as it turned, they flooded to get out. The same thing with Ireland. People were flooding to investment, a tremendous amount of investment in Ireland before. Of course, Switzerland's always an attractive country. If you haven't been there, it's a beautiful, beautiful mountains. It's absolutely lovely country. It's certainly an attractive place to live. Italy, of course, getting migrants from Africa. There's Belgium. That's Luxembourg. That's probably more. That was attracting people that are investing. That may have been part of that. But Europe, much of Europe, a very attractive place. That's Albania. Albania is the poorest country in Western Europe. It's an interesting history. These are this was the most communist country during the Cold War. This was for decades nobody could travel there. And even when people tried to swim away, they had the soldiers were shooting at anybody who tried to leave. It wasn't a very nobody wanted to go there, and they wouldn't let anyone leave. I think for about 30 years there was one American that was allowed to go there. Only one. Some person who had some connection, and no Americans were allowed to go there for 30 years. Curious place. It's also Muslim, if you're familiar. This is Albania is a Muslim country that historically is this. This is the early 1990s. This is Serbia. This was, of course, engulfed in war at this time. So that was a war as Yugoslavia broke up. The Balkans. Where this was a civil war, quite terrible civil war in that part of the world. And then you see much of Europe was getting migration, certainly from those countries. Ireland, just attractive place for investment, and probably some people of Irish descent may have gone back. This is a country. The interesting thing about Ireland, Ireland has about half the population now, a little bit more than half the population now it had in 1850. 160 years ago, it had more people, almost double. That's how much population has moved out of Ireland over more than 100-year period. In poverty, there's historically a lot of but was a very poor country. Things have changed now. It's become quite a Canada, very attractive country to migrate to. A lot of Asian migration. Has anyone been to Vancouver, British Columbia? It's a lot of Asian. A lot of people that migrated from Asia, and you go around that town, and there's Chinese is written everywhere. Chinese everywhere, and it's for for a lot of it is our real estate agents. There's a lot of money from China that's going there. Basically, what Canada says, you bring enough money, you can become a citizen, and they give you a passport. So a lot of people in Hong Kong, for example, there's a lot of people in Hong Kong and a fair number of mainland China as well that have invested in Canada, and they hold Canadian passports as well as Hong Kong passport. A lot of wealthy people in Hong Kong hold a Canadian as well as Hong Kong passport. So the day that if China comes in and says, okay, this is totally a part of China, and you can't do anything anymore, and we're going to completely run it, those people are just going to get up and go there. They already own homes, they're already invested there. So that's part of that story. But part of it is also Canada is quite open to. It's a very attractive place. They're not for the U.S. has a lot of low-wage, low-skill labor, a lot of illegal immigration from Mexico. That's red, you see. But Central America, I mentioned Central America, that's flow up here. That's low-wage labor that's flowed up here. But Canada they haven't gone to Canada wants people with skills. So if you have skills, it's very easy to get Canadian citizenship. I have a sister-in-law that lives in Vancouver. My brother's wife, and a brother's wife, and she's originally from Iran, and her father they moved. He was an engineer. He could get to Canada, and they were happy to have people. So that's why you get that dark blue. And you can see the flow. It's just very easy to see this flow from Central America up north. That's Jamaica, English-speaking, people going to the United States, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, again, going to the United States. Panama and Costa Rica are attractive countries, quite attractive countries. There's a lot of we've talked about the financial industry there. Costa Rica is a lot of retirees from the United States that go to that country. And the same thing with Belize. Belize is English speaking. A lot of retirees from the United States going there. That's why that's blue. And we see that pattern. Again, the pattern's fairly similar pattern. Cuba, again, going to the United States. This was 1993. There was a lot more migration from Mexico, a lot of illegal. This is almost all of it illegal immigration to the United States during. And you see notice how the United States gets darker, gets lighter. That was the real era of massive illegal immigration. This 10-year, 1993 to 2002. Massive flow, millions of people moved to, flowed to the United States. Australia is very attractive. A lot of migrants now from Asian countries. It's been more open to immigration. But a lot of this is also people from the UK. A lot of British people. They have nice weather in Australia. Britain has terrible weather. If you've ever, London's a place to make a lot of money. You can make a lot of money there, but the weather's awful. But money's a very powerful thing. Let's see. That's East Timor. East Timor, that little country, the former Portuguese colony that was absorbed by Indonesia, and then became independent. 2003, 2007. Again, you've had that Australia attractive destination throughout that period. 1993, not so much, but you can see throughout it's been attracting people, and this is really from all over the English-speaking world. certainly. Mostly English speaking, but some Asia, other parts of Asia, other parts of Asia as well. South America, you've had that Chile, just attractive economy. Certainly one of the most attractive economies in South America. These are the Andes countries, relatively poor, out-migration from these countries. That's Guyana. That is an English-speaking country. It was formerly an English colony. Those people are going up to the United States and working in households, working as servants. There's a lot of servant labor. So they speak English. So it's just like in Philippines. It's kind of a similar. It's the South American version of the Philippines. You know, where a lot of people going out to get jobs in other countries because they speak English and they're working as servants. And you see that pattern throughout there, flow to Chile. So the message here is you want to look at it's both people that are moving because of attraction to opportunity and or fleeing problems. So people moving for opportunity, you saw that a lot of the Eastern European joining the EU, people just moving because of economic opportunity, people fleeing civil wars or wars as the other major region, or in this case, people speaking English. That because they speak English, they can. It's easy for them to get low-skilled labor in countries like the United States, especially when they're and at an era when it's so easy for illegal immigrants. People just come on a tourist visa and they stay. That's very easy in the United States. You see the same pattern there. That's Peru. At this time though, 1980 to 2002, do you remember, you heard a person of Japanese descent that was president of this country? Fujimori? You ever heard of the President Fujimori? Yeah. He was descended. I don't think I think he lives in this country now as an exile, but I don't think he speaks a word of Japanese. You know, he's full ethnic Japanese, and he was the president of this country. And at this time, there was a lot of a left-wing rebel activity. They were sabotaging the economy, causing a lot of terrorism incidents and all. Fujimori was quite a strong man. Interesting thing was that. He was Japanese, of Japanese descent, but very much in the tradition of Spanish strongmen. It was interesting. It's an interesting story. I know someone here that actually knows some of the family, and they've worked with them. But I think he lives here. He lives in this country now. But I think at least when he came here, he didn't speak any Japanese at all. But that was people fleeing that problem. Asia, one of the interesting things is that there's some out-migration, but you know what's interesting is that it's relatively the net migration has not been very much. There's Singapore. You see, that's dark blue. You know, Singapore is a very attractive place for, especially people with money. It's the same. Chinese. The schools, especially the private schools, are full of the children of mainland Chinese wealthy people. So there's a lot of that. A lot of Indians with money that have gone there. It's a place to protect your money. Indonesia, the same thing. It's a safe haven. It's a safe haven. It's stable, and as I say, it's bought a lot of friends with its money. I worked with I worked with the Government Investment Corporation of Singapore for a number of years on their investments in Japan. I was working with them and with American developer that were developing real estate in this country. So I worked with both of those parties. So and I became quite familiar with their very smart people investing billions and billions of dollars. But that again, like Kuwait, I mentioned Qatar and Kuwait, they were buying friendship. But that's also attracting a lot of migration. Malaysia's attractive country, fairly stable, a country English speaking country. You know, it was a former British colony, and fairly stable, so it attracts a fair amount of in-migration. So I'm checking the time. We have 9 more minutes. I think we're coming to the end. I've gone through this a bit more quickly. That's Laos. It's a lot of people have been moving out of that. Cambodia's a lot of out-migration. Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Not so much from India. And one of the interesting, you'll see there's some positive. It is actually positive. And certainly where I live, the part of the city I live, I really am beginning to see the effect of migration. Certain parts of Tokyo. I mean, it's not major, but you can start feeling it. My neighborhood is full of Indian restaurants now. I walk around my neighborhood and I hear Chinese spoken. A lot of just casually walk around and you hear people speaking Chinese. That's not unusual anymore. But what's interesting is that compared to the other, the European countries and all that, and countries like Canada, United States, it's blue because it's a very attractive country, but it's hard to get here, and that's that. It's separated by water, so it's not easy to get here, and it's easy to get rid of people. So that's otherwise, I would think there would be millions of people that would want to get here, millions of people from other countries in Asia that would want to get here if there was free migration. And that's certainly an interesting story because the country's losing population. It's an interesting question as whether those policies will change. But that's certainly the way that is now. That's Afghanistan. I wouldn't say that's anything really positive. People were going back. There was a period of some stability there. Sri Lanka is English speaking. It was part of British colony. So since they're English speaking and their country is relatively poor, they go out. Myanmar 2003-2007. All outflow here. Outflow from the Philippines. A lot of inflow to Malaysia and Singapore there. That's Bhutan. It's the world's happiest country, they say. They have a happiness index. So I guess people were going there because it's happy, and have more happiness there as well. Thailand. It's interesting. It's interesting. Here, Thailand. What's going on? This was after the financial crisis. That's the effect of the financial crisis. That Thailand had a period of a very difficult period. I forgot to mention, and you see how it gets lighter. So the crisis it wasn't hit very hard. That's about average for the world. It wasn't hit very hard by the financial crisis of 2008, but it was hit very hard, as we talked earlier, by the financial crisis of 1997. And that's the aftermath, and this was before the crisis. Of course, this was during it, but before a lot of in-migration to that country. Of course, people have been leaving that country. This was the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's Kazakhstan. See that dark red, and this is Tajikistan. The dark red there, these were people, ethnic Russians, going back. They weren't, when the Soviet Union collapsed, this was all part of the Soviet Union prior to 1991. When it collapsed, all these became independent countries. And Kazakhstan especially, I think about 40%, in 1990, I think about a third of the population were ethnic Russian. It's gone down, and some of that is a migration back to back to Russia. You see that slowed down, and now there's actually immigration again. So that was the early era of the collapse of the Soviet Union there. Of course, these countries in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East. Most of the population are guest workers in these countries, especially Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. Most of the people who live in those countries are guest workers. It's about 2/3. There's a very small native population, and so there's and many of them are from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, other countries in South and Southeast Asia that have gone there to work as construction workers. Probably not paid very well and all of that, but that's another story. So they've attracted the same thing here, migration to work in the oil industry. Lots of guest workers, and also people from Europe. So high skilled jobs there. That's probably refugees. That's now the refugee crisis. That's here. That's the effect of Syria, the civil war, Syria, moving to Lebanon. About 1 million people went to Lebanon. I think more than 1 million to Jordan. Huge. 2 million people, I think, went to Turkey. That's all just because of the effect of the civil war there. It's all the effect of the civil war. Going back, this was pre-war. That was before the war. Syria was attracting, people were migrating there. That was a year before the war started. I nearly went to Syria. I was in Turkey, and it was like 2009, and I really wanted to go to Damascus, and I just and so I was planning. I was thought, well, let me go check. Let me just go to the Syrian consulate in Istanbul and get, there was like a 30-hour train that goes from Istanbul, and I thought, let's ride that train. I didn't have enough time, and it took like a week or so. You had to wait. I didn't have enough time, because I thought, well, that's a nice stable country. I could go to I would have really loved to have gone to, but I say it was 1 year before the Civil War started. Yeah, I really wanted to go. Damascus is a place I always wanted to go. It's an ancient city, and told it's quite beautiful. So I kind of wanted to go there, but wasn't able to. Another place that I'd like to go is there's a place called Sanaa. It's the capital of Yemen. It's beautiful, a beautiful ancient city. But then after I heard about that, then they had their civil war, so I can't go there either. So all these nice places that would be interesting to go to. Let's see. You've got that's Israel. That was the end of the Soviet Union. Russians going to Israel. Again, the Gulf region. I don't know what was going on there then. I'm not sure about that. And that's Oman, which is a fairly wealthy country, but not as wealthy. And that is like the last slide. So one of the things I'm heading for here is we're going to talk about, we're done. We're going to talk about inequality we're going to talk about income inequality. So this is where, income inequality, one of the things we want you to understand as a part of all this is why our income's different, and some of the reasons, both within and between countries, but not only within, but but within countries, income differences that cause these migration patterns. A lot of that, as I mentioned, wars. Oh, and to close, I wanted to. You're still working on your midterm. I want you to take all of this and think about what I've talked about. All of those connections in the first question, and the second question, and also the material that I presented to you until now, and start thinking about what you want to do. And so I really want you to start now, from now on, to get serious about that. I want you to really start focusing for the rest of the term on your research project. So I'm going to from now on a weekly basis. So I do want to see a serious, well thought out proposal. And the thing, I don't want you to, you have a lot of ideas. You've seen a lot we've covered the whole planet in many different aspects of the economy, and natural resources, trade, and also you should be having a lot of ideas. Pick something, start focusing on it. Sorry you can't do the Pearl, the Pearl thing. There's a whole world of topics out there. I'm looking forward to that, and I don't want you to worry about. Again, it's not an English language. I'm interested in your ideas and seeing some ideas that you've learned in the course of the class. It's a small class, so and a little bit smaller today.